So today we're going to talk about how to make your voice sound as good as possible for your podcast recording or even on YouTube. This can be used in many different places. There is a kind of minimum threshold that people are willing to listen to, and audio is the first thing that will destroy somebody's ability to listen to your podcast or even your YouTube video. So let's get into the details here. All of this is like a chain, and it starts with your mouth. Not your voice, your mouth. And the sound that comes out of your mouth. And then that sound goes not into the microphone, into the room, and then into the microphone, and then through your processing on your computer or whatever device you're using to process that sound. So we have to start with the mouth itself. Speaking, it seems like something that's easy to do. And God, my listeners know that I fumble words all the time. It is not easy to talk for a living because every flaw will come out. But there are some flaws that you can clamp down on. First of all is enunciation. Make sure that when you are speaking, that you are saying all of the consonants in your words. Don't overdo it like this, but make sure that you are speaking a little bit more clearly than you would if you were just talking to your friend across the room. This is important because different people have different hearing ability and different processing ability. You want to make your speech as appealing and easy to understand as possible to the people you're listening to. And this takes practice. When you go in front of the microphone, put on your I'm about to record my voice hat and start speaking a little bit differently, and then listen to yourself back. The other thing that you want to be aware of are mouth sounds. The way that we move our mouths will get picked up by microphones, especially if you're very close to them. So make sure that your mouth is dry. One of the tricks for this is eating an apple. It actually helps remove some of the moisture from your mouth before you speak. But for the most part, make sure your mouth is relatively dry, but also not too dry. Have a glass of water around in case you need to take a sip in order to moisten your throat. The other thing that gets a lot of people is that they speak with a lot of ums and uhs. And that creates a lot of editing time if you're going to go back and remove those, or it creates another potential tripping point for a listener, because sometimes too many ums and uhs and likes and you knows can ruin the experience for people. They start to cue in on it like a laugh track in a sitcom, and then that's all they can hear. So try to speak without ums and uhs. If you get to a place where you feel an or coming on, pause and then speak. It's a thing you have to practice, but you can do it. So now that we're moving on from the voice, let's move into the room. Your room is very important. The best place for you to record would be in a sound booth. Why is that? Because there's soundproofing and it's treated in the room basically so that there's no reverb, there's no outside noise, there's nothing else that's getting into that microphone that you don't want there except for your voice. Most of us don't have sound treated rooms in our homes. The closest thing that you probably have is your closet, and there's a reason for that. The items in your closet are primarily made up of fabrics like cotton. Those fabrics are extremely good at absorbing sound waves. You would think it's like the foam that you see in people's rooms, like all these YouTubers have like foam on their walls. That actually doesn't work that great. That's marketed to work that well. It doesn't. If you actually look at the way those work in tests, they remove like low end frequencies the best. So like for instance, my room, you can't see it, but up in the corners, I have some blocks in the corners to reduce the bouncing of low bassy tones. But other than that, it doesn't really do very much. The best thing to use, and if you look around my room, I've got these panels over here, and then I've got the Dova Dude in the back. These are made out of fabric. Those panels on the side, those are canvases, but inside the canvas, I've stuffed sheets of fabric so that they actually absorb sound. And if you don't want to spend the money on these kinds of things, because that Dova Dude's, that back here, that Dova guy, he's pretty expensive. Those sound panels individually will add up. These guys are easier to make because you can just go to your fabric store and buy the stuff to get them, but you need a lot of them. The best thing to do, make sure that you're in a room with carpeting or a rug. Put up extra drapes or fabric around the room. If you have things to hang on the walls, like some of those flags and stuff in the background, if they're made out of fabric, put those up. They help break the reverb, they help absorb sound, and that's probably the best thing you have to start with if that's what you're looking to do. So let's move on to microphones like this. Now, this microphone costs a lot of money. It's about a $400 microphone. It's something that I didn't get right away because I didn't have the money for it. I needed to start making some money in order to do that, or I needed to save up or whatever. I don't recommend, and I don't think it's necessary for every single podcaster to have a $400 or more microphone. It's nice. It's a convenience. It's something that I've been able to afford because I've been doing this for a while, but it is 100% not necessary. What is necessary to know is that you need to get the right type of microphone with the right interface, and you need to get a microphone that also meets a minimum bar of quality. So what am I talking about? So there are dynamic mics, and then there are condenser mics. And dynamic mics, like this one, absorb sound more easily right in front. They also are not as touchy. You can talk really loud or you can talk really quiet. It's still going to pick up both things, and you get less of the sounds from things in the other room or the dogs barking at the neighbor's place. That stuff is picked up less. Now, it still picks those things up. It is still sensitive to sound, but not as much as a condenser mic. A condenser mic is designed to pick up every little detail, every little mouth noise. It's the kind of microphone you would see in a voiceover booth at a at a professional's home or at a studio. You can also see them being used in studios for recording vocals and those kinds of things for songs. They're higher quality if they're done well, but they're also more sensitive. So go with a dynamic mic. And the biggest thing that I see people making a mistake on, and I did the same thing, is I started with a Blue Yeti because they were so popular, and you don't need a Blue Yeti. Blue Yetis are condenser mics, and they will pick up every sound around you. I had to use it at the quietest setting in order to make sure that it didn't pick up everything, and it still did. They're great microphones, especially for the price. There's nothing wrong with them. Some people on the internet will say they're terrible, but there's really nothing wrong with them. All right, so go with a dynamic mic, and you also have the choice of the way it plugs into your system, either USB or XLR cable. XLR cables go into audio interfaces. You don't need an audio interface in order to set up the recording for your podcast. Again, they're nice. They give you a lot of options. And if you're sitting in a room with a bunch of people, they're probably 100% necessary in that situation. But if it's you in front of your computer talking with somebody else over the internet, a USB mic will work great. You don't need to go out on a limb for that. So best mic you can get, this one, SM7B, at least this is the best you can get for $400 without spending like $1,000. And even then, you're not going to really notice the differences. I recommend this guy if you can afford it. And if you have an audio interface, a Go XLR works as well as an audio interface. You don't need something way complex. I will have links also underneath for all these different items if you want to go shopping. And they're going to be affiliate links, so they don't cost you anything more, but they help contribute a little bit to me if you buy something. So go check those out. If you don't want the best high-end one, you want to go step down. I like Shure Mics. I've been using Shure Mics for a while. The MV7 is one that I recommend to a lot of the podcasters on my Rocket Club, because it costs about half as much as the SM7B. So you're looking in the $200 range. I think they're $219 right now from the Shure website. So I'm sure you could probably find them a little bit cheaper. And they include both an XLR and a USB. So you can use them for both things. They have a very similar diaphragm, and they have a very similar setup where, and this is another thing you need to make sure you have, inside of it is the shock mount. That means that if I touch it and bump it, it has a certain amount of buffering there that keeps those bumps and sounds from coming through to the microphone. Some will if you hit it hard enough, but it removes a lot of that. Also, there's this little windscreen on the front that comes with it. It's a pop filter. This is the smaller one. There's a bigger one. It works like a pop filter. It's not as good as a pop filter. Some people will put a screen in front as well. It's good enough for what I do, so that's what I go with. Both the SM7B and the MV7, words are hard, MV7 have all of this stuff built in. $219. It's a great deal. It's almost exactly the same quality as this for a lot cheaper. It wasn't out when I bought mine. I probably would have bought one. Go check that out. If you want something below that, then the SM58 is like a classic dynamic mic. They use them on stage all the time. It works for podcasting. The SM78 does have an XLR plug, So you do need an audio interface for that. If you're looking for something that's in that $100 range, like that microphone, that's also got a USB plug, then going with Rode mics, which I've also used, the Rode Podcaster, great mic, used it for years, almost indistinguishable from this guy. Very close, not quite exactly the same, but killer deal. Go with it. It's a USB. Also, if you're going to buy one of those other mics that doesn't have the built-in shock mount and windscreen or pop filter, make sure that you spend a little bit of extra money for that. Also, get a good boom arm. I mean, you can get a cheap one. This one's fairly cheap. A nicer one stays in place better. I don't have to fiddle with it. But with a pop filter and with a shock mount, it's not going to make as much sound if you have to move it. So let's talk processing. That's the last detail here. Processing. It is 100% important that you take care of all of this other stuff before you get to post-processing your voice, because the quality of the sound coming in equals the best quality going out. I can't say that enough. Anything you try to fix in post will not sound right. If you're doing noise reduction, it creates a weird effect on your voice. It fixes some of the sounds in the background, but it's not great. Get the best signal going in that you possibly can. That said, there's EQ, there's compression, and then there's maybe touching things up a little bit beyond that. I recommend the minimal amount of EQ that you possibly can do on a mic. A lot of people will push up the bass a lot and push up the treble a lot and make their voices sound really boomy and really crispy. That is fatiguing on your ears. I've played with that before. You can listen to some of my older episodes. Ultimately, a flat signal through a good mic is a wonderful start. Maybe a slight boost to certain frequencies, but that's a whole nother video. Go with a good quality flat sound to begin with, and you should be fine. Let's talk compression. So this is the thing that I find a lot of podcasters and a lot of YouTubers don't really get right. Have you ever played a video or a podcast and all of a sudden you're like, why does it sound loud and then quiet and then loud and then quiet? And why does everything sound kind of far away and muffled? That's because they're not using compression, or they're not using it right. So with compression, what it does is it lowers the loud sounds, but it raises the quiet sounds in order to bring everything into this like middle range that works really well, especially when you're listening in an environment that is not optimal. Anybody who uses a DAW, a DAW, who actually like puts their audio into a program and then is able to edit it, has access to compression. It's usually one of the filter settings on whatever DAW you're using. Even the cheap free ones have this ability. The settings that I recommend are something around a 4:1 ratio, an attack between about 15 milliseconds and 30 milliseconds. 30 is punchier, 15 isn't as punchy. It has to do with how quickly the compressor kicks in. And then there's a release, and I would go for about 40 milliseconds on the release. You kind of want to stop talking and then allow it to disappear a little bit after that. Or when your volume gets lower below the threshold. That's another detail you want to change and mess with. Around a negative 26 decibels threshold is about what you need. But again, make sure that your mic is coming in at a good level, that everything's starting the chain well, and then these settings make sense. If you're trying to make up for bad settings, you might have to tweak with this stuff until it becomes normal sounding. But that's, again, not the best thing to do. Also, when you're mastering everything, run compression through your voice if you're talking by yourself. But if you're mastering everything, like multiple voices, music, all of those things, run compression on the master channel, on the master bus, and don't put it individually for each of the speakers and all of those things. You only need to run it in the master bus. That's the one place. It'll squish everything together. But before you do that, make sure that the individual levels for each of the speakers are set very evenly, not necessarily the same percentage, that they sound right, and that any music or backgroundy stuff is about half the volume of that. It doesn't need to be super loud, especially if you're talking over it. It could be about a quarter of the volume and you're fine. And then you compress it all together, you export the file, and now you have a file that sounds a lot better. The last thing you need to know, though, is that you want to master it for peaks around negative 6 decibels. Maybe -3 at the top, but -6 is a pretty good place to go so that it sounds loud. You don't have to turn up your speakers a whole lot to hear everything, but it is also not clipping and blowing out and creating gain in your voices. You don't need that. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope it was very helpful. If it was, make sure you come back, subscribe to the channel. I've got all sorts of other tips. And if you want to learn more about what can actually revolutionize your podcast and grow it better than anything else that most podcasters don't know about, go check that video out.